Okay. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's hard to follow such a good talk, but I will try. There are many abilities that children need to develop to be happy and successful in life. Some of the most important, both for happiness and for success in school and in life, include things like being able to stay focused and pay attention, creative problem solving, being able to think outside the box, to be able to reason, being able to delay gratification and stay the course, the self-control to not put your foot in your mouth. By the way, I live in Canada now, but Brian is a real Canadian. I'm a New Yorker. And one of the characteristics of a New York accent is to talk very quickly. So no one can write as fast as I speak. I will give a copy of the slides to the organizers, so you don't have to worry to try to write down what's there. And I give my apologies to the translators in the beginning. They have a difficult job, and I appreciate how good they are. And other abilities are being able to resist temptation and not act impulsively, being able to take advantage of serendipity, the flexibility to adjust to changed demands or priorities. All of those are executive functions. There are three core executive functions. The first one I'll speak about is inhibitory control. That's being able to resist a strong inclination to do one thing and instead do what is needed or most appropriate. At the level of attention, it's focused attention. So here's a young boy concentrating on his math despite lots of distractions in the room. This enables us to be able to concentrate and stay focused. One of the best examples is singing in a round, where you try to screen out what the other groups are doing so you sing your portion at the right time. But because we're able to selectively attend, we can miss important things because we're selectively looking for other things. My slides are stuck. I can't get it to move. Let's see. Nothing is working. Okay, let's see if that fixed it. Okay, people were asked to count the number of photos in a newspaper. Some people finished in a few seconds, others took minutes. It's not that some were faster counters. It's that on the second page, in large block letters, it said, "Stop counting. There are 43 photos." But some people were selectively looking only for photos, so they never noticed the words. We need to balance selective attention with cognitive flexibility. Young children have very immature attentional control. They can easily get distracted by beautiful posters on the wall. Kindergarten and first grade teachers love to decorate the walls of their classroom with beautiful pictures and posters. It turns out that decorating the walls makes it harder for young children to concentrate on their schoolwork. They get distracted. So Anna Fisher and her colleagues have shown that young children are better able to pay attention and learn more when the walls are more bare. On the other hand, we can underestimate how capable young children can be. Next, you'll see a 3-year-old displaying truly outstanding perseverance and focused attention. This is a Mexican child, so if there was sound, you would be able to understand, but you can understand without sound. You don't need it. No sound. Many of us would be very tempted to go in there and help the child. It's taking so long and he's trying so hard. But if we helped, he wouldn't have the pride of having done it himself. So we need to be patient. Give young ones time to figure out things on their own. Don't intervene too quickly to help out. Inhibitory control at the level of behavior is self-control. Being able to resist temptations, not act impulsively, thinking before you speak or act. Examples of self-control are many. For example, waiting your turn, not hitting, not eating dessert before the meal. Often when somebody hurts our feelings, our first reaction is to want to hurt them back. But we don't want to get in the cycle of tit for tat. You hurt me, I hurt you. So we need self-control not to do our first inclination. Not blurting out the first thing that comes to mind. Maybe there's an old friend who you haven't seen in many years. You're so excited to see this person you like so much. But your first reaction on seeing your old friend is, my God, how much weight you gained. But you don't say that. You say something to make your friend feel good. Or maybe you write a really angry email message, but you don't press send. Exercising self-control. To not jump to a conclusion about what something must have meant, because we can often be wrong about the intent behind something. And to have the discipline and perseverance to resist the many temptations to quit and not finish what you started. To continue to work even though the reward might be a long time in coming. To delay gratification. Self-control saves us from putting our foot in our mouth or making a social faux pas. Think of all the trouble you'd get in if you blurted out the first thing that came to mind, if you told your boss what you really thought of him or her. You grabbed whatever you wanted without asking or paying, or did other socially inappropriate or hurtful things. If we want to change, if we want to mend our ways, we need self-control. The second core executive function is working memory, holding information in mind and working with it. And if you think about it, you need working memory for anything that unfolds over time, because that always requires holding in mind what happened earlier and relating that to what's happening now. So, for example, it's obvious that you need it for oral language because you have to hold in mind what you heard earlier and relate that to what you're hearing now. But it's also true for reading. You have to hold in mind what you read earlier and relate that to what you're reading now. Many things you need this for, including reasoning and creative problem solving, being able to play with ideas and facts in your mind, relating one to another. Also, working memory involves holding information in mind while you're trying to work on something else. So, for example, maybe there's a question or a comment that you're thinking of that you'd like to ask me or tell me. But you're trying to hold that in mind while you're following what I'm saying in the talk. So that takes working memory. You're holding one thing in mind while you're trying to process other information. Working memory and inhibitory control each independently predict both math and reading competence from the earliest grades through university, often better than does IQ. Executive functions need to be continually challenged to see improvements, not just used, but challenged. And one wonderful way to challenge working memory is with storytelling. I'm a huge fan of storytelling. Storytelling invites a child's rapt attention and challenges it for extended periods, sustained, focused attention, and working memory to hold in mind everything that's happened before, the characters' identities, the plot details, without any visual aids, without pictures on the page, puppets acting it out, or video. You have to hold it all in mind. So while story reading, where the child can see the pictures on the page each time you read, is wonderful, but storytelling, where only you see the pages, or you don't even use a book, I think will improve executive functions more because it challenges them more. A researcher randomly assigned children in kindergarten and grade 1 to storytelling, where only the teachers see the pages, or story reading, where after each page the teacher turned it so the children could see the writing on the page and the pictures. What they found is vocabulary and recall improved more in the children assigned to storytelling than the children assigned to story reading. And you just heard from Brian how important the early vocabulary is. Vocabulary assessed at age 3 strongly predicts reading comprehension at 9 to 10 years of age. The third core executive function is cognitive flexibility. Being able to see an issue or anything from different perspectives, thinking about something in a whole new way, seamlessly adjusting to change or unexpected situations. To give you an example of seeing the same thing from different perspectives, think about the similarity between a carrot and a cucumber. Maybe they're both long or they're both vegetables. Then how is a carrot like an orange? Now you're thinking about color. How is a carrot like a potato? Maybe you're thinking about how they grow underground. How is a carrot like an apple? So this is just an example of how you think about the same thing in different ways, cognitive flexibility. Cognitive flexibility also involves the flexibility to take advantage of a sudden opportunity, not stay stuck with what you plan to do necessarily if some wonderful opportunity has arisen, or to get around unexpected problems so you can reach your goal, and even to admit you were wrong when you get more information. An example of poor cognitive flexibility is given by Alexander Graham Bell. When one door closes, another door opens, but we often look so long and so regretfully upon the closed door that we do not see the ones which open for us. If there's a problem we haven't been able to solve, can you think outside the box to conceive of the problem, frame the problem in a whole new way, to come up with a completely different way of attacking it? Einstein said, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. Can you creatively see the same thing from different perspectives? Like, what kinds of crazy, outside-the-box things could you ever imagine doing with a table? Obviously, you can write on a table, you can eat on a table. But what unusual uses could you think of for a table? Maybe you could hide under it, or turn it on its side to protect you from things people throw at you. Turn it upside down to play horseshoes. Use it as a percussion instrument, or cut it up for firewood. Okay, to think outside the box. To study cognitive flexibility in adults, we often do task switching, where you have to think about something from one perspective and then another. The classic test for frontal lobe function in patients has been the Wisconsin card sort. A simpler version of the card sort was developed by Phil Zalazzo for young children, 3 to 5 years of age. There are only 2 colors and 2 dimensions. So when you're sorting by color, the blue truck goes with the blue star. But when you're sorting by shape, that same blue truck now goes with the red truck. So you have to focus on different aspects of the truck. Think about it in different ways. 3-year-olds can sort perfectly either by color or shape, no problem. The problem comes when they have to switch. They have enormous trouble switching. Most 3-year-olds cannot switch. They continue sorting by the first dimension. Already by 4 years of age, most children can do it. So I wanted to show you 2 videos of this. In one case, the child starts with shape, In the other case, the child starts with color, because I wanted to show you it's not that one or the other is easier. I don't know quite how good your English will be, but in the first video, the young child is unusually talkative, and she's telling you what she's thinking. 1 minute. 1 minute. I have the sound off on my computer, so 1 second. Yes. Okay.
This is a star. Where does it go?
It's not. Your sound isn't working. No. No, it's on. Honest. It's all the way up. I don't think so. Everything's up. Yes, everything's up. It's at 100%. Let me try again.
This is a star. Where does it go? Go ahead. So point and show me where the trucks go. Excellent. And where do the stars go? Good job. This is a truck. Where does it go? Go ahead. So, trucks go here and stars go here. Here we go, Caleb. This is a star. Where does it go? Excellent. Okay. Now we're going to start playing the color game. Remember, in the color game, red ones go here and blue ones go here. So, this is a blue one. Where does it go? Go ahead.
It has a track on it, so it goes in here.
Well, remember, we're playing the color game. And in the color game, blue ones go here and red ones go here. So this is a blue one. Where does it go? Put it where you think it goes.
There's a track.
Where do you think it goes? Put it where you think it goes. Then take it and put it there. Okay. So point to where the blue ones go. Very good. And where do the red ones go? Very nice. This is a red one. Where does it go? Go ahead. Where do you think it goes?
Oh, this has a star on it. So it has to be going in here.
Whichever one you think.
I think this one.
If that's where you think, then put it right there. Okay. Just remember, in the color game, blue ones go here and red ones go here. This is a blue one. Where does it go?
Well, it has a truck.
Where do you think it goes?
It doesn't have a star. It has to be going in here.
Okay. So point and show me where the red...
I'll go to the next one now.
The blue ones go here, the red ones go here. This one's red. Where does it go? We did. Where do the blue ones go? Beautiful. Where do the red ones go? Awesome. You got it. You're so good at this. This one's blue. Where does it go? The red ones go here, the blue ones go here. This one's red. Where does it go? Where do the blue ones go? Awesome. Where do the red ones go? Amazing. You're very good.
This is so easy. He's yawning.
Okay, so we're not going to play the color game anymore. We're going to play the shape game again. Remember the shape game? The trucks go here, the stars go here. Where do the trucks go? Good job. Where do the stars go? All right, high five. Get a high five for that one. Oops. This one's a star. Where does it go? The trucks go here, the stars go here. This one's a truck. Where does it go?
And the blue.
Where do the stars go? Good job. Where did the trucks go?
Hey, Dante and Tyler.
Perfect. This one's a star. Where does it go?
So what we call this is attentional inertia. That once their attention has focused on one dimension, it kind of gets stuck there, and they need to disengage from or inhibit their previous way of thinking about the stimuli. It's not enough to know something and remember it. You have to get that knowledge into your behavior. We have assumed that if children knew what they should do, well, then they would do it. If they didn't, they were intentionally misbehaving. But between knowing and implementing, another step long ignored is often needed. When there's a strong competing response, that response has to be inhibited. Young children may not be able to do that. A child may know what he or she should do and want to do that, but still not be able to act accordingly. Now, in the normal card sort, each dimension, color, and shape is an intrinsic property of the object. So we tried separating it, where color is a property of the background. So a star is always a star, a truck is always a truck, and a card can be blue or red. When you separate color and shape, now twice as many children succeed at any given age, and they succeed about 6 months earlier. You'll note that nothing very much really helps the 2.5-year-olds because it's really too hard for that age. But for the slightly older, this helps a bit, but it doesn't make them at 100%. It just helps a bit. At 3 to 4 years of age, there are many common mistakes that children make that all seem to revolve around having to see something from 2 different perspectives and inhibit a prepotent response. So, for example, experimenters show children this thing, and they ask them, what do you think it is? Well, they say a rock. It looks like a rock. It's the right answer. And then the experimenter shows the child that it's really a sponge. You can squeeze it. So the child has to wrap his or her head around that it looks like a rock, but it really is a sponge. 3-year-olds will have no part of that. Either it's looks like a rock and it is a rock, or it looks like a sponge and it is a sponge, but it can't be both. Now, we don't make that mistake, obviously, but we have discomfort with ambiguity and difficulty often in seeing both sides of an issue or 2 perspectives on the same thing. Even we can have difficulty accepting that good people or good nations sometimes act wrongly, or that people who disagree with us might be right about something. Here's another example of a task used with children. It's called false belief. You ask the child, what do you think is in this Skittles box? So they say Skittles. It's the right answer, right? Anybody would say, I guess it's Skittles in that box. And then we show the child, there are really crayons in there. And then we ask the child, can you remember before we showed you what was in the box, what did you think was in the box? And with an absolutely straight face, 3-year-olds say, crayons. Of course. Now, we don't make that mistake. It's called knew it all along or hindsight bias. I'll come back to that in a minute. We don't make that mistake. But let's say I asked you, what's the likelihood that I'm really Spanish, that I'm not American or Canadian? You might say, it's possible. Maybe 50, 60% likelihood. And then I tell you, or somebody tells you, that I really am Spanish. And a week later, we asked you, what did you guess was the likelihood that I might be Spanish? And you remember that you thought it was kind of likely, but you've heard that I really am. So you say, well, I thought it was maybe 75, 80% likely. We misremember what we had guessed because we're affected by seeing what's actually the truth. So Natasha Kirkham and I published a whole paper of examples like this, of the dumb things we laugh at 3-year-olds doing, like the card sort, and instances of how we adults do the same thing, but more subtly. So for example, we can switch between sorting by color or shape, but we're always slower at the second dimension. We have a kind of inertia too, but it's more subtle. If what you have to do is not switch dimensions, but switch within a dimension. So for example, I say, sort the stars with stars and the trucks with trucks, and you do that for a while. And then I say, we're going to switch to a silly game. And in this silly game, the trucks go in the star bin and the stars go in the truck bin. Now children of 2.5 can succeed. So there's a progression that you see in children's abilities to be able to exercise cognitive flexibility. It should come as no surprise that executive functions are important for every aspect of life. Success in school and in the workplace, making and keeping friends, marital harmony, physical and mental health, and avoiding things like substance abuse or driving fatalities. From the 3 core executive functions, higher level executive functions are built, like problem solving, reasoning, and planning. And fluid intelligence is the same thing as problem solving and reasoning. If we want children to do well in school and in life, we need to help them develop healthy executive functions. And my lab and I have done reviews, intensive reviews, of all the different programs and interventions to try to improve executive functions. We have a paper coming out that I think is the most comprehensive of any review of this, because it includes all the different ways and all the different ages. I wanted to mention one thing that I thought Brian sounded a bit too discouraging about, because it's not clear that the gaps or deficits present after the first 3 years absolutely cannot be made up. The jury is out on that, and you see children with these deficits who go into phenomenal educational programs where you see enormous gains by these children. And there may be subtle things that remain, but you can see an enormous amount of catch-up. So it's not clear that you're doomed if you're way behind after the age of 3. Regardless of the program to improve executive functions, certain principles apply, and here are a couple of examples. Whether gains are seen depends on the amount of time spent practicing, working on the skills, pushing yourself to get better. And that's true of being excellent at anything, not just executive functions. A man named Erickson spent his whole career seeing what makes an expert in all kinds of different fields. And what he found is the answer is always the same: lots and lots of practice. He said 10,000 hours of practice. It's the discipline, the practice, that produces the benefits. Setting aside a time to work on executive functions is not as effective as working on them as part and parcel of what you do all day long. When activities to improve executive functions are embedded in academic activities, then teachers don't have to add yet another activity to all the things they have to do in school. Now they have to set aside an hour for executive functions. Where are they going to find the hour? They don't need to do that, because it can be part of the reading and part of the math and part of the science. And then all day, every day, these skills are being trained. Also, executive functions need to be continually challenged. Not just practiced, but challenged. And that's not only true of executive functions, but it applies to everything else. Again, Erickson showed that it's not just the number of hours practicing, but the kind of practice. Not practicing what's easy and you're already good at, but pushing your comfort zone, challenging yourself to go a little bit beyond what you could do before. Vygotsky called this the zone of proximal development. Executive functions appear to transfer, but the transfer is narrow. People improve on what they practice, and that transfers to other contexts where those same skills are needed. But you only improve on what you practice. Improvement does not transfer to other skills. If improvement in a particular executive function skill is your goal, then you need to engage in activities that require and train and challenge that skill. If your goal is to improve many executive functions, then you need to engage in activities that require and train each of those different executive functions. There's been a lot of interest in computerized cognitive training. Computerized working memory training does, in fact, improve working memory, but it does not generalize to other executive function skills like self-control or cognitive flexibility. CogMed is the computerized method for training working memory with the most evidence and the strongest evidence. But even here, only 1/4 of the studies have found any transfer to other skills other than working memory. Indeed, in a large randomized control trial in Australia, they found that the working memory improvement from CogMed was still present a year later, which is very good. But 2 years later, it was gone. And 2 years later, when they looked at math, the children who were in regular academic instruction, instead of CogMed, were doing better in math 2 years later. Thus, it's fair to conclude that working memory computerized training improves working memory, but the results have generally been disappointing, with narrow benefits that fade away in several months' time. Sometimes the reason why something works is different from what anyone expected. Although most studies of CogMed don't mention the mentoring component, to be certified to administer CogMed, adults must get trained in and commit to mentoring those doing CogMed. And a recent study out of the Netherlands suggests that it's the mentoring component that accounts for the benefits from CogMed rather than the computerized games that they're so proud of. Contrary to influential reviews of the benefits of aerobic exercise per se, without a cognitive component, and perhaps without other components, does not improve memory or executive functions at all, period. Of 12 aerobic studies in children that we reviewed, only 1/3 found better executive functions than in control subjects. A meta-analysis of 12 other aerobic studies in adults found 0 evidence of improvement. But people who are more physically active and have better aerobic fitness have better executive functions. I'm going to return to that seeming contradiction later. While training and challenging executive functions is needed for them to improve, that alone is probably not enough to achieve the very best results. It's likely that indirectly supporting executive functions by lessening things that impair them and enhancing things that support them is also critical. And here's why. Executive functions depend on prefrontal cortex and the other neural regions with which it is interconnected. Prefrontal cortex is the newest area of the brain over the course of evolution and the most vulnerable. If you're sad or stressed, lonely or not physically fit, prefrontal cortex and executive functions are the first to suffer and suffer the most. Conversely, we show better executive functions when we're happy, feel socially supported, and we're healthy and physically fit. We're more creative and have better selective attention and working memory when we're not feeling sad. When we're sad, we have worse working memory and selective attention. When we're happy, we have better working memory and selective attention. The most heavily researched predictor of creativity and social psychology is mood. The most robust finding is that a happy mood leads to greater creativity. Creativity in the specific sense of cognitive flexibility. It enables people to work more flexibly and to see potential relatedness among unusual and atypical members of categories. Joy is not the opposite of serious. The distinction between work and play disappears when you're doing something you really enjoy. Serious business like learning can and should be joyful. Research shows we learn more, the children learn more, and get more done when we're happy. Our brains work better when we're not in a stressed emotional state, and that's particularly true for prefrontal cortex and executive functions. Stress impairs executive functions and can cause anyone to look as if you have an executive function impairment like ADHD. When you don't at all, you're simply stressed. So that clinicians need to eliminate the possibility that a child's misbehaving because of stress or having cognitive difficulties, rather than immediately diagnosing ADHD. You may have noticed that when you're stressed, you can't think as clearly or exercise as good self-control. When I'm stressed, I reach for the chocolate. Here are some of the neurobiological reasons for why that's the case, why stress so affects prefrontal cortex. Even mild stress selectively increases the neurotransmitter dopamine in prefrontal cortex, but not elsewhere in the brain. Prefrontal cortex needs dopamine to function, like your car engine needs gasoline to function. But if you flood your car engine with gasoline, now it can't function. And if you flood prefrontal with dopamine, now it can't function. When you're stressed, the body gives off cortisol. There are more receptors in our brains in prefrontal cortex for cortisol than in any other region of the brain. A few weeks of stress in preparation for a major exam disrupts the communication between prefrontal cortex and other regions of the brain and executive functions. It disrupts the functional connections, the messages being sent. When the stress is over, it comes back. If you're stressed, you can't be the parent or teacher you want to be. If you're stressed, your children will pick up on it. It will make them stressed. And if they're stressed, their school performance will suffer. So relax. Imperfect is not the same as worthless. Don't be so hard on yourself when you make a mistake. Being imperfect is not a problem. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody's imperfect. Many children are so terrified of making a mistake that they're afraid to try anything new. We need to let children know it's okay to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, even us. The only way to completely avoid mistakes is to stay with what you already know to stop growing, right? If you go beyond what you know, you have a 50-50 chance of being wrong because you don't know. So if you want to be sure you don't make a mistake, then don't venture beyond what you know. But if you don't venture beyond what you know, you don't learn more and grow. Einstein said, anyone who's never made a mistake has never tried anything new. Help your students to relax. Each of these can help with that. Predictability, consistency, clear expectations, clarity about what is and is not permitted, stable routine, things in their place, knowing what to expect. Pets reduce stress. There's much research that the presence of a dog in the classroom reduces stress and helps children perform better on their cognitive tasks. Our brains work better when we're not feeling lonely or socially isolated, and that's particularly true for prefrontal cortex and executive functions. We are fundamentally social. We need to belong. We need to fit in and be liked. Children who are lonely or ostracized have more difficulty learning. We need social support and a sense of social belonging, activities where everyone is working toward a common shared goal, where each person's contribution is important. And it's not just peers. A close relationship with a caring adult can be huge. People who feel lonely or are focusing on anticipating being alone show worse executive functions than people who feel or anticipate feeling more socially supported. And the same thing is true for prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex works less efficiently in people who feel isolated or alone. What matters most in early childhood education? A man named Melhus in the UK has studied early education all around the world, all the data he could get in every country he could get. And he found that the variable that matters the most is not the number of children, it's not the adult-child ratio, and it's not the quality of the material, but the relationship between the children and the adults. If the children feel cared about, the children show the best outcomes. Relationship trumps instructional style, subject matter knowledge, adult-child ratio, having the best equipment, hands down. Relationship, relationship, relationship. Jerome Frank conducted a study comparing all the different types of psychotherapy. This is an old study from the late 1950s. He was at Johns Hopkins University. And he wanted to find which type of psychotherapy gives the best results. Psychoanalysis, Rogerian, cognitive, behavioral, etc. And to his great regret, it didn't matter at all which type of psychotherapy the therapist thought he or she was practicing. What mattered was that the clients felt deeply cared about by the therapist. If that was true, they tended to get better. 50 years later, Bruce Wampole did a similar study. He looked at all the different types of psychotherapy. And what he found again is that the client-therapist relationship trumps technique hands down. Across all types of psychotherapy, nothing predicts a good outcome as reliably as the patient's experience of the therapist as being warm, caring, and genuine. And thus the patient's experience of being seen, heard, and understood. Now you heard from Brian that early life stress can shorten telomeres. Telomeres are the protective tip at the end of chromosomes. You can think of them like the plastic tips on your shoelaces that keep your shoelaces from fraying. Telomeres keep chromosomes from fraying. A cell dies when its telomere gets too short. Thus, telomeres determine the lifespan of cells, and by extension, the lifespan of us. If telomeres get too short, if the cell doesn't die, it can malfunction, giving you inflammation or cancer or other tumors. Here you can see that in children who've been exposed to two of the early adverse experiences that Brian talked about, two or more, already at 5 years of age have shorter telomeres. And at 10 years, the difference is even larger. But maternal sensitivity and warmth completely overrides the effects of early adversity on telomere length. So here's what I told you. The children exposed to adverse early life experiences have shorter telomeres. But if they're lucky enough to have a fantastic mom who's a really good listener and really shows she loves you and cares, then there is no effect on telomere length at all, 0. That's the study. Another example that maternal sensitivity and warmth trumps early adversity and socioeconomic disadvantage comes from an older study. Here, they're looking at behavior problems, so higher is worse. You want to be low. Here are the higher SES kids, here are the lower SES kids. And even if a poor, low SES kid is lucky enough to have a fantastically responsive mom, then that child shows less behavior problems to the much more advantaged higher SES kid. This is probably also true of fathers. It's just that all the research so far has been done on mothers. Your humanity is more important than your knowledge or skill or doing the textbook perfect thing. Your caring, your openness to truly listen, being there for your child when he or she needs you is more important than your knowledge or skill. And we're not just intellects with emotions and social needs, we also have bodies. The brain doesn't recognize the same sharp division between cognitive and motor function that we impose in our thinking. The same or substantially overlapping brain systems subserve both cognitive and motor function. For example, an area of the brain called the pre-SMA is important for sequential tasks. And it doesn't matter whether they're sequential motor tasks or sequential cognitive tasks. Motor development and cognitive development appear to be fundamentally intertwined. The different parts of the human being are fundamentally interrelated. Each part is affected by and affects the others. The best and most efficient way to foster any one of those is probably to foster all of those. We have to care about children's emotional, social, and physical well-being if we want them to be able to problem solve, exercise self-control, or display any of the other executive functions. If a child is stressed, sad, lonely, or not physically fit, the very academic performance a school is trying to improve will take a hit. Returning to my prediction, activities that will most successfully improve executive functions will not only work on directly improving executive functions by training and challenging them, but will indirectly support them by lessening things that impair them, like stress and loneliness, and enhancing things that support them, like joy or physical vitality. What activities directly train and challenge executive functions and indirectly support them by also addressing our social, emotional, and physical needs? Traditional activities that have been around for millennia, for tens of thousands of years across all cultures. Storytelling, dance, art, music, and play have been part of the human condition. People in all cultures made music, sang, danced, did sports, and played games. There are good reasons why these arose everywhere and have lasted so long. They challenge our intellects, they challenge our executive functions, they make us happy and proud, they build our self-confidence, they address our social needs and help our bodies develop. It doesn't have to be the ones I just mentioned. Almost any activity can be the way in, can be the means for disciplining the mind and enhancing resilience. Many activities not yet studied might well improve executive functions. Again, I'm stuck. Okay, I don't know why it gets stuck. No, I'm okay. It could be caring for an animal. It could be a service activity, doing something to help your community or people elsewhere. The key is that the child really loved the activity and really want to do it, so he or she will spend a lot of time at it, pushing him or herself to improve. Returning to the seeming contradiction, people who are more physically active and more physically fit have better executive functions, but aerobic interventions, even ones that last a year, do little to improve executive functions. Many people who maintain better fitness do so by participating in physical activities that involve cognitive challenges and complex motor skills, not simple aerobics like riding on a stationary bike or running on a treadmill. Results for interventions with more emphasis on motor skills and cognitive demands have produced only slightly better results, though, than mindless or simple aerobic exercise. But most have looked at disembodied skills, abstracted from the sport. So, for example, the children might practice some skills from tennis or some skills from basketball, but never ever play tennis or basketball. They're learning them in the abstract. Exercise alone appears not to be as effective in improving executive functions as exercise plus character development, like traditional martial arts, exercise plus mindfulness, like yoga, or other exercise that requires thought, like football. Here's a new study, it's not published yet, on tennis. In one case, the children played tennis. These were 6 to 12-year-olds. They're playing tennis at a very simple level, but they're playing games of tennis. They're playing tennis. The other group did practice the skills of tennis, like your forehand stroke, but they never played a game of tennis. And the control group just watched TV. And here you see on a composite of executive functions, those who played tennis are doing much better than those who practice skills, although they're doing better than controls as well. On other executive function measures, those who just practice skills are not doing any better than controls, but those who did tennis as a game are doing better. In a study of Taekwondo, they randomly assigned children in grades kindergarten through grade 5, either to traditional martial arts or to standard phys ed. And what they found is the children assigned to Taekwondo showed greater gains than children in standard phys ed on all the dimensions of executive function studied, and this generalized to other contexts and was found on multiple measures. It appears that the extent to which exercise, music, or any other activity has a large effect on executive functions is proportional to how much joy the activity engenders in the person. People who maintain better fitness often do so by participating in activities that engage their hearts and minds. Many are passionate about these activities and deeply committed to them. These activities can be an important part of their lives, an important source of pride and personal identity and social life. Most executive function interventions have focused only on training executive functions or only improving aerobic fitness in order to improve executive functions, ignoring powerful emotional factors. Yet, if you're passionate about an activity, you'll devote lots and lots of time and effort to it. And it's the hours of practice, pushing yourself to improve, that drives the benefit. The sky's the limit to what young people can achieve if they're engaged in activities they're passionate about, where mentors and experiences inspire and instill self-confidence. I propose that whether someone is emotionally invested in an activity that trains executive functions is key to whether or not that activity improves executive functions, and how much joy a person derives from an activity that challenges executive functions will predict the extent how much executive functions improve. Benefits from any program, of course, depend on the way the activity is done and the amount of time spent doing it. Focusing exclusively on training cognition, as mainstream education tends to do, may not be the best or most efficient way to improve cognition. Addressing children's social, emotional, spiritual, and physical needs may be key to whether they do well in school and in life. Nurturing the whole child may be critical for achieving the outcomes we all want for our children. And I added one slide after Brian's talk, because all of the things I talked about and he talked about, music, dance, many of these things which I'm saying are so wonderful, there is no evidence that it really improves executive function yet. The evidence Brian cited on music was correlational. We are waiting for the evidence-based causal studies to show that what we think is true is true. These are just predictions right now. And it's so funny because my colleagues who fund my basic neuroscience grants with no problem, when they see the word music or dance in my grant application, they say she's gone California. It's too soft. So when you get the slides, you'll get the URL for a video where you can see some of these activities. I wanted to thank you so much for your attention and thank all those in my lab and my funders. Thank you very much.